It's early 1972. We are deep inside the meticulously manicured halls of the Department of Justice in Washington, D.C. The air is thick with the smell of stale pipe tobacco and impending political doom. At the head of a massive mahogany table sits John Mitchell, the Attorney General of the United States. To his side are other high-ranking operatives for Richard Nixon's re-election campaign, looking bored and eager to get to lunch. But standing at the front of the room, clutching a stack of professionally designed, color-coded charts, is a man who is about to propose something so wildly illegal, so thoroughly unhinged, that the room is about to go dead silent. The man's name is G. Gordon Liddy. He's a former FBI agent, a current Nixon operative, and a self-styled Superman whose loyalty to the president borders on religious fanaticism. Liddy doesn't want to just win the 1972 election. He wants to crush Nixon's enemies into a fine powder. He flips to the first chart. He looks the Attorney General dead in the eye and pitches his grand strategy. Wiretap the Democratic headquarters? Sure, that's standard, but Liddy wants more. He seriously, earnestly pitches a multi-million-dollar black ops program that includes hiring squads of men to physically kidnap anti-war protesters off the streets of Miami, drug them, and smuggle them over the border into Mexico. Oh, and to top it off, he casually suggests deploying a hit squad to literally assassinate an investigative journalist who had been irritating the White House. The room stares at him. Liddy waits for his applause. He is completely, terrifyingly serious. And the craziest part? The men in this room wouldn't fire him. They just told him his budget was a little too high. Most people know that Richard Nixon resigned in disgrace because of the Watergate scandal, but very few know about the absolute lunatic who actually planned the dirty work. A man obsessed with hyper-masculinity, a man who once held his own hand over a burning candle until his flesh charred black just to prove his willpower. This is the story of the ultimate chaotic antagonist of American politics. Welcome back to Audacious History, where we dig up the wildest, most unbelievable figures from the past and figure out exactly what the hell they were thinking. Today, we are looking at George Gordon Liddy. To understand the sheer, unadulterated madness of the Watergate break-in, you cannot just look at Richard Nixon's paranoia. You have to look at the psychology of the man Nixon's team hired to do the things no sane person would ever do. G. Gordon Liddy was born in 1930 in Hoboken, New Jersey, and he was, by all accounts, a terrified child. Young Gordon was asthmatic and afraid of absolutely everything. He was afraid of loud noises. He was terrified of the dark. He was petrified of heights. He was so terrified of lightning storms that he would hide under his bed, trembling like a leaf, while the thunder shook his house. He was the prime target for bullies, a weak kid in a tough, working-class neighborhood. But Gordon didn't just accept his fear. He developed a deep, burning resentment for it. He became obsessed with the idea of the Übermensch, the concept of the Superman. He believed that the only way to conquer fear was to brutally force himself to face it, to override his human instincts with sheer, terrifying willpower. When he was 11 years old, during one of the most violent thunderstorms to hit New Jersey that year, Gordon Liddy didn't hide under his bed. Instead, he climbed to the very top of a massive tree in his neighborhood. He strapped himself to the trunk with a belt and stayed up there as the lightning crashed around him, the tree swaying wildly in the gale force winds. He stayed there for hours, screaming into the storm, forcing himself to endure the terror until the fear literally burned itself out. When he came down, he wasn't afraid of thunder anymore. He had conquered it. But he didn't stop there. Gordon was also terrified of rats. One day, his cat killed a rat and left it on the kitchen floor. Most people would throw it away with a shudder. Gordon Liddy took it, roasted it over a fire, and forced himself to eat it. Yeah, you heard me right. He ate a dead, cat-killed street rat piece by piece, fighting back the urge to vomit, just to prove to himself that he could command his body to do whatever his mind dictated. This obsession with willpower birthed his most famous parlor trick. Later in life, when he wanted to intimidate someone or prove his absolute psychological dominance, Liddy would light a candle, place his palm directly over the flame, and hold it there. He wouldn't flinch. He wouldn't pull away. He would hold his hand in the fire until the flesh literally blackened, bubbled, and cooked. The stench of burning meat would fill the room. When horrified onlookers would ask him, "What's the trick? How are you not screaming?" Liddy would look at them with dead, shark-like eyes and say his famous catchphrase, "The trick is not minding." By the time he reached adulthood, Liddy had forged himself into a weapon. He joined the military and then the ultimate playground for a man obsessed with authority and action, J. Edgar Hoover's FBI. Liddy was a good agent on paper, but his intense, dramatic flair always put him at odds with the buttoned-up bureaucracy. He was the guy who treated a standard background check like he was James Bond saving the free world. Legend has it that he once brought a woman into the FBI shooting range, pointed to the silhouette target, and completely blew the head off the paper dummy with a rapid-fire volley from his revolver just to impress her. Spoiler alert, it worked. They got married. Liddy eventually left the FBI. Some say he was forced out. Others say he got bored, and worked as a prosecutor in New York, where he was known to carry a loaded pistol into the courtroom and occasionally place it on the prosecution table just to establish dominance. Normal lawyer stuff, right? By the late 1960s, Liddy's ultra-conservative views, aggressive tactics, and absolute unquestioning loyalty caught the attention of the Nixon administration. Nixon's White House was a paranoid place. The president was convinced that leaks, the press, and the anti-war left were trying to destroy his presidency. He needed men who were loyal to a fault, men who didn't ask questions. Enter the plumbers. Nixon's team created a secret, off-the-books intelligence group tasked with stopping leaks. Hence, the plumbers. Liddy was paired with E. Howard Hunt, a former CIA operative and pulp spy novelist who was just as theatrical and ridiculous as Liddy. These two were a match made in a very dark, very chaotic heaven. Their first major mission was to break into the office of a psychiatrist treating Daniel Ellsberg, the man who leaked the Pentagon Papers. Did they do this quietly? No! Liddy and Hunt dressed up in absurd CIA-issued wigs, oversized glasses, and ill-fitting uniforms. They looked like two men going to a Halloween party as the concept of suspicion. They broke into the office, trashed the place to make it look like a robbery, and found absolutely nothing of value. The mission was a total clusterfuck. Any rational administration would have looked at this bungled burglary, looked at these two middle-aged men playing spy games in cheap wigs, and fired them instantly. But this was the Nixon White House. Instead of firing Liddy, they promoted him. They moved him over to the Committee for the Re-election of the President, beautifully acronymed as CREEP, and told him to come up with an intelligence-gathering plan for the 1972 election. And that is when G. Gordon Liddy was handed a blank canvas to paint his masterpiece of madness. Which brings us back to that massive mahogany table at the Department of Justice. This is the confrontation scene you came for, the pitch meeting for Liddy's magnum opus, Operation Gemstone. Liddy has spent weeks preparing this. He had professional charts drawn up by the CIA. Each subplot of his operation is named after a precious stone. Liddy stands at the front of the room, looking at Attorney General John Mitchell, White House counsel John Dean, and campaign deputy Jeb Magruder. Liddy clears his throat. He doesn't smile. He begins. "Gentlemen," Liddy says, his voice tight and formal, "the political enemies of this administration must be neutralized. Wiretapping is insufficient. We must employ a comprehensive kinetic strategy." Liddy flips to the first chart. "Operation Ruby," Liddy announces. "We will infiltrate the Democratic Convention in Miami. We will plant operatives in their ranks to disrupt their communications." Mitchell puffs on his pipe, nodding slowly. "Okay, dirty political tricks. Par for the course." Liddy flips to the next chart. "Operation Diamond," Liddy says, his eyes gleaming. "The anti-war protesters plan to march on the Republican convention. We will form special action squads. We will physically kidnap the protest leaders off the street, throw them into unmarked vans, sedate them, and fly them to a secret black site in Mexico until the election is over." The room goes still. Jeb Magruder looks up, his brain desperately trying to process if this man is joking. Kidnap American citizens? Smuggle them across an international border? Gordon, Magruder stammers. "Are you talking about international kidnapping?" "It is a necessary logistical relocation, Jeb," Liddy snaps back, disgusted by Magruder's lack of vision. "We keep them heavily sedated. We stash them in a Mexican bunker. It's perfectly viable." Before anyone can process the sheer illegality of a federally funded kidnapping ring, Liddy flips the chart again. "Operation Sapphire," Liddy continues without missing a beat. "We will lease a luxury yacht in Miami. We will hire a stable of high-end, extremely attractive prostitutes. We will wire the yacht for sound and video. We will lure prominent Democrats onto this floating brothel, ply them with alcohol, compromise them on hidden camera, and use the footage for blackmail." John Dean, the president's lawyer, is now staring at the ceiling, wondering if he's having a self-induced hallucination. Hookers on a spy boat. The president's re-election campaign is being pitched a James Bond villain's weekend itinerary. But Liddy is not done. He has a grand finale. He flips to the final chart. "And finally," Liddy says, lowering his voice to a conspiratorial whisper, leaning over the table, "the Jack Anderson problem." Jack Anderson was a mudraking investigative journalist who had been a relentless thorn in Nixon's side, publishing leaked administration secrets. "We take him out," Liddy says flatly. Mitchell stops puffing his pipe. "Take him out? You mean discredit his sources?" "No, John," Liddy replies, staring with those dead black eyes. "I mean we kill him." Liddy goes on to earnestly propose multiple methods of murdering an American journalist. He suggests slipping LSD onto the steering wheel of Anderson's car so he crashes and dies in a fiery wreck. If that doesn't work, Liddy suggests a classic old-school mob-style hit on the streets of Washington, D.C. Let's pause and assess the reality of this moment. A former FBI agent on the payroll of the President of the United States is standing in the Department of Justice asking the Attorney General for permission to hire prostitutes, kidnap citizens, and murder a journalist. The tension in the room is suffocating. Magruder looks like he's going to be sick. Dean is calculating his own prison sentence. And John Mitchell, the Attorney General of the United States? Does he jump up, scream, "What the actual fuck is wrong with you, Gordon?" and call the FBI to arrest him? No. Mitchell takes the pipe out of his mouth, looks at the $1 million budget at the bottom of the chart, and sighs. "Gordon," Mitchell says in a tired, raspy drawl, "that's $1 million. It's too much money. You need to go back to the drawing board and bring the budget down." Can you believe this? Instead of arresting him, they told him to find a coupon. Hey, do me a favor and support independent history storytelling by hitting that subscribe button. Done it? Awesome. Let's get back to the story. Rebuffed by Mitchell's frugality, a deeply insulted Liddy went back to the drawing board. He cut the hooker boat. He cut the Mexican kidnapping squad. He reluctantly cut the assassination plot. He scaled Gemstone down to a measly $250,000 budget, focused primarily on wiretapping the Democratic National Committee headquarters located in the Watergate complex. Mitchell finally approved it, and thus, the most infamous political scandal in American history was set in motion, masterminded by a man who fundamentally believed he was starring in his own spy thriller. On the night of June 16, 1972, Liddy and Howard Hunt set up their command post in a room at the Howard Johnson Hotel directly across the street from the Watergate. They were armed with walkie-talkies, drinking whiskey, and waiting for history to be made. They deployed their burglary team, a group of anti-Castro Cuban exiles and a former CIA wiretapper named James McCord. From the very beginning, this elite operation was an absolute unmitigated joke. It was a comedy of errors that would make the Three Stooges look like Navy SEALs. First of all, the burglars broke into the building and taped the locks on the stairwell doors so they wouldn't lock behind them. But they taped the locks horizontally, leaving the tape sticking out for anyone to see. Frank Wills, a 24-year-old security guard working the graveyard shift, noticed the tape. He thought a maintenance worker had left it, so he removed it and went on his way. When the burglars realized the tape was gone, did they abort the mission? Did they assume they were compromised? No, they just broke in again and retaped the doors. Frank Wills came back around, saw the new tape, and realized something was deeply wrong. He called the police. Now, normally, an operation like this would have lookouts. And Liddy did have a lookout posted across the street, but the lookout was watching for marked police cars. Because it was the middle of the night, the precinct dispatched an unmarked car filled with 3 plainclothes officers who had been working the vice squad. They were dressed in jeans, t-shirts, and long hair. The lookout saw 3 hippie-looking dudes walk into the Watergate and assumed they were just residents coming home from a late night out. He didn't radio Liddy. Back in the Howard Johnson Hotel, Liddy and Hunt are listening to the radio. Suddenly, they hear the panicked voice of their lead burglar, James McCord. "They got us!" McCord whispers frantically into the radio. "It's the police! We are caught!" Liddy grabs the radio. His master plan, his glorious contribution to the Nixon presidency, is unraveling before his eyes. The police catch the 5 burglars hiding in an office, wearing surgical gloves, carrying thousands of dollars in sequentially numbered, crisp $100 bills directly traceable to the Nixon campaign, and holding high-tech eavesdropping equipment. Liddy and Hunt panic. They scramble to pack up their command center. Hunt wipes down the hotel room to erase fingerprints, while Liddy immediately shifts into survival mode. The great Ubermensch, the man of sheer willpower, has just overseen the dumbest burglary in the history of American politics. He goes home, wakes his sleeping wife, and utters one of the most chilling, melodramatic lines of his life. "Pack your bags," Liddy tells her. "There's been a massive failure. I might be going away for a very long time." He then took a large shredder, shoved in all his gemstone files, and literally destroyed the evidence of his own madness. As the Watergate scandal broke open and the FBI began tracing the money back to the White House, panic gripped the Nixon administration. Men who had sworn undying loyalty to the president, John Dean, Jeb Magruder, John Mitchell, suddenly turned into terrified snitches, sprinting to the prosecutors to cut immunity deals and save their own skins. They squealed. They sang like canaries. The entire inner circle collapsed into a pit of backstabbing cowardice. Everyone, that is, except G. Gordon Liddy. To Liddy, this was his ultimate test. This was the moment where he could prove that his willpower, his honor, and his masculinity were superior to everyone else's. Shortly after the arrests, Liddy sought out John Dean, the White House counsel. The walls were closing in, and the FBI was asking questions. Liddy walked with Dean down a street in Washington, D.C., completely calm. Liddy looked at Dean and delivered a speech so insanely hardcore it sounds like it was written by Quentin Tarantino. He apologized to Dean for the failure of the break-in. He said he understood the danger this posed for the president. And then Liddy offered a solution. "John," Liddy said, his voice devoid of any emotion, "if someone wants to shoot me on a street corner, just tell me what corner to stand on. I will be there. I am ready." He meant it. He wasn't speaking metaphorically. G. Gordon Liddy, an American lawyer and campaign operative, was earnestly offering to let a White House death squad assassinate him to tie up a loose end. Dean, horrified, told Liddy that nobody was going to shoot anyone and to please stop talking like a mobster. When the indictments came down, Liddy was arrested. In court, before the notoriously harsh Judge Maximum John Sirica, Liddy did the unthinkable. In an era where every other Watergate co-conspirator was crying on national television and pleading for mercy, Liddy stood at attention. He refused to testify. He refused to name names. He refused to cooperate with the Senate Watergate Committee. He invoked his Fifth Amendment rights, zipped his lips, and dared the federal government to break him. They threw the book at him. Liddy was sentenced to up to 20 years in federal prison. He ended up serving over 4 years, mostly in maximum security, longer than any other Watergate figure. And his time in prison is exactly as deranged as you would expect. Liddy didn't just survive prison, he treated it like a hostile takeover. When a tough inmate tried to intimidate him in the dining hall, Liddy stared the man down with his dead shark eyes and warned him that he would snap his neck. The inmate backed off. When the prison guards would perform roll call and demand the prisoners sing out their names, Liddy felt this was humiliating. So instead of shouting, "Here," Liddy, who was deeply fascinated by German history and the concept of ultimate discipline, would stand at attention and blast out verses of aggressive, marching German anthems at the top of his lungs until the guards gave up and just checked off his name. He was a nightmare inmate because he literally feared nothing. You couldn't punish a man who willfully held his hand in an open flame. The prison system, designed to break men's spirits, bounced right off the impenetrable armor of Liddy's psychosis. He spent over 4 years behind bars, silent, unyielding, and utterly unrepentant. When President Jimmy Carter finally commuted his sentence in 1977, Liddy walked out of those prison gates the exact man who walked in. So what happens to a disgraced, unhinged political mastermind after he takes the fall for the president? Does he fade into obscurity in shame? Hell no! Not in America. In America, you monetize your infamy. G. Gordon Liddy wrote a wildly successful autobiography called Will, which sold millions of copies and detailed his rat-eating, candle-burning, Nixon-loving exploits. He leaned into his reputation as the ultimate villain. He literally acted in television shows, famously playing a cartel-affiliated, ruthless antagonist on Miami Vice. Because, well, the casting director didn't really have to ask him to act. He just showed up and was himself. He became a highly successful, highly controversial conservative talk radio host for decades, blasting his uncompromising worldview across the American airwaves until his retirement. He lived to be 90 years old, passing away in 2021. defiant to the very end. History often remembers the Watergate scandal as a story of tapes, cover-ups, and a disgraced president. It focuses on the constitutional crisis and the triumph of the press. But tucked right in the middle of all those dry, historical textbook facts is G. Gordon Liddy, the wild card. The man who proved that sometimes the course of American history is altered not just by brilliant strategy or political ideology, but by an absolute lunatic who was terrified of thunder as a kid. So he grew up, conquered his fear, and decided to just burn down the political landscape instead. That's it for this deep dive into the chaotic mastermind of Watergate. If you want more unhinged, audacity-filled stories from history, hit subscribe, leave a like, and comment below. Would you have approved Operation Gemstone? Or would you have called the cops? Until next time, keep your secrets safe, double-check the tape on your doors, and remember, the trick is not minding. See you next time.